It's pretty wild to think that over 1,200 years after he died, we are still living in a world shaped by this one guy. He's called the Father of Europe, which sounds great, right? But he was also a brutal conqueror, an enlightened reformer who, get this, struggled to even write his own name. Today, we're going to try to untangle all those contradictions and figure out who the real Charlemagne was. So, that's the big question, isn't it? How on earth did one Frankish king manage to unite a totally shattered continent? What did he actually do that was so foundational he earned that Father of Europe title? And why, over a millennium later, does his story still matter? Well, that's what we're going to dive into. Okay, so to really get Charlemagne, you have to picture the world he was born into. Forget the Roman Empire. That was ancient history by this point. What was left was, honestly, a total mess. Just a chaotic patchwork of little kingdoms and tribes all at each other's throats. No central power, just constant war and backstabbing. That's the world he stepped into. But, out of all that chaos, a new power was starting to rise. And Charlemagne was right at the heart of it. But his path to becoming this legendary emperor, it wasn't easy. It didn't start with a crown and an empire. Nope. It started with him having to share the throne with a brother he really did not like. So back in 768, the Frankish kingdom gets split right down the middle between Charlemagne and his little brother Carloman. And their lands were all tangled up together, so they really had to cooperate. But there was one tiny problem. They absolutely could not stand each other. So you've got this kingdom that's divided on the map, and a ruling family that's totally divided by jealousy and rivalry. And then just 3 years into this, let's call it a tense arrangement, Carloman just dies suddenly. And Charlemagne, he doesn't miss a beat. He immediately swoops in, takes all his brother's land, completely ignores the fact that his little nephew should have inherited it, and just declares himself the one and only king. Just like that, the first major roadblock to his ambition was, conveniently, gone. Okay, so now he's the sole ruler. The kingdom is his. And this is where we see Charlemagne shift gears. He's not just a king anymore. He's about to become an empire builder. And his reign, for the next few decades, is going to be defined by almost nonstop and often incredibly brutal warfare. Right. So with his home turf locked down, Charlemagne looks to expand. And for the next 30 years, think about that, 30 years, his entire reign is basically dominated by one single conflict, the Saxon Wars. And this wasn't just some quick little battle. This was a brutal, drawn-out, generational fight to conquer the pagan tribes living right on his border. And you have to understand, this was not just a land grab. Not at all. For Charlemagne, the sword and the cross were two sides of the same coin. He had two goals here. First, crush the Saxons on the battlefield. And second, completely wipe out their pagan religion and force them to become Christians. It was conquest and conversion, all rolled into one. And the way he went about it, it was just horrific. The absolute worst example has to be the massacre of Verdun. The Saxons had rebelled, and in response, Charlemagne's army rounded up 4,500 prisoners, and according to the chronicles from his own court, he had every single one of them beheaded in one day. It's a chilling look at the brutal reality of how he built his empire. But the absolute peak of Charlemagne's power, the moment that changes everything, doesn't happen on a battlefield. It happens inside a church. So picture this. It's Christmas Day, the year 800. And Charlemagne is in Rome, the very heart of the old Roman Empire. And right there, in a move that absolutely stunned everyone, Pope Leo III puts a crown on Charlemagne's head and declares him Emperor of the Romans. I mean, this was huge. For the first time in over 300 years, there was an emperor in the West. This was basically a massive statement saying, hey, the real power isn't over in Constantinople anymore. It's right here with this Frankish king. But here's where the story gets a little tricky. Charlemagne's own biographer, a guy named Einhard, wrote later that Charlemagne was totally shocked. He supposedly said that if he'd known what the Pope was planning, he never would have even gone into the church that day. So, was he genuinely surprised? Or was this all just a brilliant piece of political acting? Honestly, historians are still arguing about that one. Okay, so winning an empire with an army is one thing, but actually running it, that's a whole different ballgame, and Charlemagne knew it. Now that he was emperor, he realized he needed more than just soldiers to keep this massive territory together. He needed smart people, he needed good laws, he needed a shared culture.
And that need is what kicks off this incredible revival of learning and art that we call the Carolingian Renaissance.
And it's really important to get this. This wasn't about art for art's sake. The Carolingian Renaissance was super practical. Think about it. To run a huge empire, you need government officials who can actually read and write. You need priests who actually understand the Bible. This was a Renaissance with a very clear, very practical purpose. And the sheer scale of what he did is just amazing. He created a standard currency for the whole empire. He standardized laws. He pushed for schools to be set up in monasteries all over the place. His scholars even invented a whole new way of writing, Carolingian minuscule, that was way easier to read. And here's a fun fact. The lowercase letters we're all using today? Yep, they're direct descendants of that script. You can thank Charlemagne for that. So we have this larger-than-life figure, but who was the actual man? Well, his court biographer, Einhard, gives us this amazing detailed description. He tells us Charlemagne had large and lively eyes, a short and fat neck, and a nose that was slightly larger than usual. It kind of brings him down to earth, right? He wasn't just a legend. He was a real, powerfully built guy, apparently with a pretty big nose. And for a guy with all that power, he was apparently a lifelong learner. And this is my favorite story about him. The man who sparked this huge intellectual revival could barely write himself. Einhard says that even when he was an old man, he kept little wax tablets under his pillow so he could practice his letters at night. These started too late in life to ever get really good at it, but he never stopped trying. How amazing is that? But that leads to the big question. What happens when the one person holding this massive, complicated empire together is gone? Charlemagne's death was going to be the ultimate test of his creation. So let's take a look at what he really left behind. And the short answer is, the unity didn't last. Not even close. After he died in 814, his son took over. But after he died, Charlemagne's 3 grandsons immediately started a civil war. It all ended with the Treaty of Verdun, which basically took a knife to his empire and carved it up into 3 separate kingdoms. And this right here, this is the crazy part. This breakup is actually his most important legacy. It's the whole reason we call him the father of Europe. Because that Western kingdom, West Francia, that became France. The Eastern Kingdom, East Francia, that became Germany. Those lines his grandsons drew on a map in 843, they were basically the birth certificate for modern Europe.
So we come back to our original question. Who was Charlemagne? Was he the brilliant visionary who saved Europe from chaos? Or was he a bloodthirsty tyrant, a saint or a sinner? And the answer is, well, he was all of those things. He was the warrior who massacred thousands and the scholar who promoted learning. The man who unified a continent only to have it break apart into the very nations that would define its future. And it's right there, in all that complexity, all those contradictions, that we find why he still matters so much today.